When you retired, were you excited by the prospect of finally having time to do all of those things that you had set aside or delayed while you were working full-time? Whether that was finishing your novel, taking up woodworking again, or learning how to watercolor. I know I was excited when I finally retired. I had a long list of things that I wanted to do. But then after a while, I began to notice that on many days, at the end of the day, I felt a sense of frustration. Finally, I understood it was because I had this sense that I just wasn't getting enough done each day. So over the last 9 months or so, I developed a system to help deal with this frustration. My goal was simple: to better manage my day consistent with my priorities. In this video, I'll share my system. And if you've dealt with the same sense of frustration, stay tuned. You may find something that's helpful here. And I can tell you now that this system has helped replace that sense of frustration with a better understanding of what's possible each day and a sense of accomplishment at the end of the day. My system is a daily process, and as such, it requires a bit of discipline. I use 4 basic tools: a calendar, a to-do list, a journal, and a mechanism for tracking my time. There's nothing special about any of these. I have a preference for doing things digitally, with the exception of my journal. I still keep an analog journal. Let me start with my calendar. I use my calendar in 2 ways. First is the way that you're probably all familiar with. I set meetings up on my calendar. It could be a board meeting, it could be a dental appointment, or it could be simply lunch with a friend. The idea, though, is that these are commitments, that I will be at a certain place on a certain date at a specific time. The second way I use my calendar is for time blocking. The basic idea is to set aside time on your calendar to focus on a single task to the exclusion of everything else. Time blocking is nothing new. I read somewhere that Benjamin Franklin blocked time on his calendar. If you're familiar with the idea, it's probably because you were exposed to the teachings of Cal Newport, who's a big advocate of time blocking. But my approach is a little different than Cal Newport's approach. First, he's an advocate of time blocking on an analog calendar. That doesn't work well for me because I keep my meetings in a digital calendar and I don't see the point of keeping 2 calendars. Second, Cal Newport is also an advocate of time blocking every minute of your day. That may work in a professional environment, but I'm retired and I like a little flexibility in my schedule every day. And indeed, if it's a beautiful day outside, my schedule may go into the bin and I'll go with my dog and enjoy the day. And finally, Cal Newport is a proponent of, if you find that your day has gone awry, reschedule or re-time block the remainder of your day. That just seems a little too fidgety for me. If my day goes awry, I just regroup and follow the priorities that I've established for that day, and that seems to work just fine. So what gets time blocked? I have my passion projects. These are projects that are creative in nature that I'm excited about. Then I have my personal projects. These are projects like the family budget and projects around the house. And finally, there are what I call discrete miscellaneous activities. These are unrelated to any of the projects, but just need to get done, like returning a library book or running an errand. But before I time block any of those, I build a structure or a foundation that's based on some core values. First, I value the time that I spend with my wife. Most of those other activities I pursue when she's not around, and she leaves for work at 6:30 in the morning and returns at 4:30 in the evening, Monday through Friday. Second, I find that in retirement I value my health and fitness more than I ever did while I was working full-time. That's a sad admission, but what it translates into is that I go to the gym on Tuesday morning and Thursday morning, and I leverage walking my dog 3 times a day in order to meet my annual walking goal. Finally, at this time in my life, I feel that it's important to give back. What that means for me is that I volunteer at the local Friends of the Library, and this entails occasionally staffing the bookstore and raising money for the library, but I'm also a member of their board and serve as treasurer. And so Friday afternoons, I deal with cash management issues. I schedule these activities using what I call structural blocks. They're scheduled on a recurring basis through the end of the year. I don't have to think about them. Here's an example of my calendar showing these structural blocks. 6:30 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon provides me with 50 hours a week. And when I schedule my structural blocks, though, I noticed that they consume over 19 hours a week. That leaves me with just over 30 hours a week for the activities that I described above, my passion projects, my personal projects, and everything else. That's not a lot of time. And this was a huge realization to me. The guy who thought, oh, I'm retired now, I'll have plenty of time. In fact, I don't. That's not a bad thing necessarily. It reflects the impact of my values on the time I have each week. And it calls for me to be much more intentional about how I spend those remaining 30 hours. The second element of my system is my to-do list. And here I want to acknowledge the thinking of David Allen in his book, Getting Things Done, where he argues that it is critical to get commitments and tasks out of your head and into a trusted system where you can come back on a routine basis and organize and address them. But I take a slightly different approach than David Allen. First, things that go on my to-do list are my discrete miscellaneous activities. They're unrelated to any project, they're standalone, and usually one-off items. Second, when any item goes on my to-do list, I assign it a date and time when I want to have it complete. Note, this is not necessarily when it's formally due, if there is a formal due date. Often I want to give myself a few days of cushion. I don't want to have to be periodically reviewing the to-do list to see what's due. It'll come up automatically based upon that date and time that I've assigned. And now for the nuts and bolts of my system, the weekly and the daily process. The weekly process is dead simple. Monday morning, I scan the calendar for the week for any conflicts. For example, recently, I had a dental appointment on a Thursday morning that conflicted with my usual Thursday morning gym time. So I simply had to make the decision of whether or not to skip the gym entirely or to reschedule it. My daily process starts each morning as soon as I'm up and about and begins with a survey of the tasks at hand. This includes reviewing my journal for any tasks that were uncompleted or open from the previous day, or any new projects that are at hand where I need to identify upcoming tasks. Then I also take a look at my to-do list to see what's due today. Based upon this inventory of tasks, then I go about the development of my daily plan. It starts with a very simple planning narrative, 2 to 3 sentences where I identify the 1 to 3 tasks that are the priority for the day, the ones that I really want to either complete or make significant progress on. But I also add a sentence describing and acknowledging any obstacles that I may be facing that day. Once I've written down my daily planning narrative in my journal, then I write down my task list for the day. This is very similar to what Ryder Carroll proposes in his bullet journaling method, but I do things slightly differently. First, I use slightly different symbols. I'm not sure if that's important though. Second, I group it by the type of project or activity. Passion project versus personal project versus volunteering versus my discrete miscellaneous activities. And most importantly, I leave a gap of 3 columns between the symbol and the associated task. Once I have my day's task list written down in my journal, then it's time for the second step in the development of my daily plan, and that is opening my calendar and scheduling what I call focus blocks, or time blocks essentially, for those 1 to 3 tasks that I've identified as a priority for that day. If I have time left over, I may schedule additional tasks as well. And if I have more than 1 or 2 discrete miscellaneous activities, I'll schedule a DMA block. Finally, I go back to my journal and write down immediately to the right of the symbol for each task that I've scheduled, the amount of time that I've scheduled that day. This is my daily plan. With practice, I've found that this takes about 15 minutes out of the 30 minutes that I have scheduled each morning for my journaling. Here's an example of my daily plan. It includes at the top of each day the planning narrative, and then below that, to the left side of the page, my task list, grouped by category. Once my daily plan is complete, then I go about my day and execute the plan, but with two key caveats. First, I track my time. Peter Drucker, in his book, The Effective Executive, argues that it is crucial to track how you actually spend your time during each day. I use a program called Toggle, but I'm sure there are other ways to do it, and you can even do it manually. It doesn't matter. What is important is that you track your time consistent with how you scheduled it. Second, the time blocks that I scheduled are guidelines. If I find myself making great progress on a specific task, it's okay to go 15, 30 minutes, maybe even more beyond what's scheduled. Similarly, if I'm in the middle of something and I get a call from an old friend, I'm taking the call, even if it interrupts my schedule. That's fine. I have priorities. At the end of each day, it's time for a quick daily review. First, write down how much time you actually spent on the tasks that you worked that day, immediately to the right of your estimate for how much time you were going to spend on those tasks. Second, score yourself by task. I use the following rubric. If I scheduled time for a task and I completed that task, it gets a big green check mark. If I made significant progress on that task, then it gets a green plus mark. But if I scheduled time for a task and either didn't spend much time on it or didn't make much progress, it gets a red dash. Similarly, there may be tasks that I didn't schedule but still ended up working, and I use much the same rubric. A big green check mark if I completed it, a big green plus mark if I made significant progress on it. But if I didn't schedule it, there's no point in expecting that I would make much progress, so if I didn't make any progress, it just gets a light dash in pencil. Then, immediately to the right of my task list, in bullet point format, I write down highlights of the day. What went right, what went wrong, but very briefly. We're not writing a novel here. This process provides me with an important basis for assessment and reflection, both in the short term and the long term. In the short term, at a glance, I can tell what progress I made each day, and what worked and what didn't work. It also provides me the data to answer harder questions. For example, am I working my plan? If there are items where I'm not spending the time that I had scheduled, that would explain why I'm not making the progress that I thought I would be. Second, it helps me confront my optimism bias. For some types of tasks, I'm optimistic about how much time it will take to complete the task, when in reality, it may take far longer. In the long term, this process also helps me be honest with myself. No matter what I tell myself about my priorities, how I actually spend my time reflects what my true priorities are. If there are tasks that time and time again, I just don't spend that much time on them despite what I have scheduled, if I find myself easily distracted or just not very energetic, but I think those tasks are important, maybe I'm misleading myself. Maybe those tasks to me are just not that important. On the other hand, if there are tasks that I just don't think are that important, but I enjoy doing and I find myself spending more time on them, maybe those are my true priorities. So that's my system. I think it's unique, not in the tools that I use, but in how I use those simple tools together to help me better manage my time and expectations so that I can achieve my goals in retirement. But my system is not about being busy, and it's certainly not about micromanaging each moment of each day. Instead, it's about helping me understand what's possible each day, and that helps end the day with a sense of achievement and not frustration. As always, I hope you found at least something helpful here. If so, leave a comment. If you use a very different system for planning your day or managing your time in retirement, I'd like to hear about that in the comments also. Until next time, thank you and take care of yourselves.